Hello and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, Justin Baker, my co-host, joining me via Skype. And as we dive right into part 2 of our trade deadline potentials, we have a signing to open the show. As you hopefully have already figured out and seen, the Toronto Maple Leafs have signed Auston Matthews to a 5-year, I guess it's $58.15 million deal over the course of those 5 years, an $11.63 million cap hit. He'll get $15.2 million in bonuses the first 2 years, $9.7 in bonuses the third, and $7.2 million in bonuses in the fourth and fifth year of that contract, with a base salary of a cool $700,000. So with that said, Justin, your first reaction to this deal?
Yeah, I got to say that this is a little bit different than what we've been seeing the last couple of years when it comes to a lot of your younger superstars, i.e. your Connor McDavids, and not signing the 8-year deal, basically, right? So he's going in and he's taking 5 years instead of what he probably could have got is 8 years, and there's very good reason for this, obviously. I think, the way the market's going, we're expecting the cap to rise and teams being able to spend a little bit more money, 5-6 years from now, and he wants to cash in because, let's face it, I don't see him getting any worse than he is now, if anything better.
Yeah, that, and I think that for the Leafs, it made sense right now with where they're at with Tavares and even someone like Patrick Marleau, who will still be on the books next year. This team is in a position where, I think basically what we're seeing is they have a 5-year window. Who knows what'll happen at the end of that deal? Matthews might re-sign, but that also takes him to UFA, and he may decide that he wants to go back to Arizona or something, or you don't know. I think that he likely he stays in Toronto for a long time, even longer after this deal. But I think that this deal was, in order to fit everyone, we need to give you less years, and therefore we're going to give you a lower cap hit, which of course he'll get a bigger cap hit later on. So I think it allows them to fit Marner. It's basically an extra probably $2 million that they would have saved if they signed him for $8 million, and so I think that helps them do what they need to do. And so next up, of course, will be Mitch Marner for the Leafs, who won't negotiate anything until after the season is over. And it's hard to imagine him getting less than 10 now at this point. So it'll be that's a tricky place to be. Right now, the Leafs have the highest 1-2 punch in the league, with Tavares and Matthews both basically coming in at 11.5. So they're both at $23 million combined. Yeah, the highest, even higher than McDavid and Draisaitl and all those guys. So it'll be an interesting. It doesn't really matter right now, but it's interesting, 3 years down the road, what will that team look like? But who knows? Maybe there's a change in the way that the whole cap works after the next CBA. We're not sure. Well, with that said, let's dive into our part 2 of our free agent list, or our trade deadline list. If you didn't listen to last show, we went through a lot of the bigger names. Artemi Panarin and Bobrovsky, those guys. And now we're it's not that the guys that we're going to talk about are necessarily small fries, but I think that these guys are after the chips of a Mark Stone, after the chips of the Artemi Panarins and the Sergei Bobrovskys have fallen. These are the potential moves. I think that everyone's kind of waiting on that. And so until we see what happens there, it's going to kind of be, all right, who gets the prize? Mark Stone. I think that Mark Stone above Artemi Panarin is actually the prize, because I think that Mark Stone is where Mark Stone could go, I think, is a greater amount of teams, because he's not as, at least publicly, has not made it his declaration of being very picky as to where he wants to be, an ocean city. And so I think it gives him some more options. And I think that he's probably a better all-around player than Panarin is too, and a little bit younger. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But let's start. Where do we want to start? We'll start with let's go Edmonton Oilers, because they're kind of in an interesting position. We know that Puljujarvi's name's been out there. Kyler Yamamoto. Of course, there's anyone. I think that everyone on this team is available outside of Connor McDavid and maybe Draisaitl, but those two guys in particular have been talked about to move for somebody they can bring in now and help them make the playoffs. What do you think happens here?
Yeah, I think, you and I sort of touched a little bit on this prior, but I'm still in the mindset, I think, that, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, right, you kind of got to ride this thing out, because in order to bring in a big-name player, you got to move some cap out, and right now they don't have really a lot of movable contracts to get guys out. Obviously, the big one that a lot of people talk about is Milan Lucic, and personally, unless Edmonton's willing to eat half of that contract, I don't see him going anywhere. And so the younger guys like Puljujarvi and Yamamoto, I think overall the best bet is keep them there, or stay put, because face it, they're 20 years old, they still got time to grow. It's nearly not time to pull the trigger on them yet. So just ride it out, see what happens.
Yep, I think we're on the same page about that. Let's go Justin Falk, who is I think we can also throw Dougie Hamilton into this mix, because, of course, Falk's been talked about for, at least the last 2 years as being a guy who maybe just doesn't fit because of the rest of the talent around him. But I feel like every defender on the Carolina Hurricanes has been thrown out there, other than Jacob Slavin, even Brett Pesce. All these guys' names have been thrown around. Do you think that a Justin Falk gets dealt, or Dougie Hamilton gets dealt, as the Carolina Hurricanes right now 3 points out of a playoff spot? But they haven't looked great all year, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to be any more than a potential last wild card team.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see them making a big splash in terms of making it past the first round of the playoffs. So why if you're making a move with one of these guys, why would you go out and get a rental, right? Because it's known that they're looking for a forward, but don't go out and go get yourself a rental guy who's probably going to leave, or most likely might leave. If you're Carolina, you want to move either a Dougie Hamilton or Justin Falk to a team where maybe you get a forward back in return who might have, a couple years left on his deal. So you can squeeze him in up there under the cap where you want to be. And let's face it, Carolina's got a lot of cap space too to work with right now. So, one team I keep going back to, and maybe it's just the hometown team, but the Red Wings, right? They've been looking for, they've got Mike Green, but they've been looking for that other right-handed defenseman to really drive another pairing. And who
would you give up? Who would you give up?
Nyquist. Maybe you make a swap. Yeah,
but they're not gonna swap a guy who is 2 years after this year on his deal is 25 years old for a Gustav Nyquist, who is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year, right? So there's got to be what are you prepared to give up a first-round pick?
No, and I think maybe you throw in another prospect here, somebody, maybe a defensive prospect that, maybe a Nick Jensen, you throw him in there, a guy who is seen as a pretty serviceable third pairing guy. So maybe they want to add some depth there, or maybe they want to use him to flip and, maybe get another pick back. But, I really don't know where either one of these two guys might end up. Just because, again, if you're a team, you have to be prepared to take on an extra year or two, depending on which one you get. And so I think if you're Carolina, you want to get somebody back with a couple years at the forward position so you can have some value from that.
The only unrestricted free agent I can see them being interested in is Mark Stone. And if Dougie Hamilton was a part of that package, that may put them near the top of the list.
Okay.
That to me would be a huge win for the Ottawa Senators. If you could bring in a high caliber defenseman to play with Shabbat, or to play on that second pairing, so that you have greater depth at defense, which is something they're sorely lacking, and have a couple of their bottom pairing guys are unrestricted as well very soon. And so I think that that to me is the only on UFA. If only if you make that trade only if you already have a contract in place for him to sign beyond this year. But okay, let's go to Matt Zuccarello with the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers have been, I would say, out of any team, exactly what we thought they would be. Like, I mean, in the Eastern Conference, I think we knew Ottawa would be bad. We knew the Rangers would be pretty middling, but still towards the bottom, and we knew Detroit would be pretty bad. And so that has all played out pretty much the way we expected it. By the way, the Flyers have won 8 in a row. If you haven't noticed, they're 5 points out of the playoffs now, and somehow and you know what, they get to play
St. Louis doing the same thing.
Yes,
on the other side.
Yes, St. Louis 6-3-1 in their last 10, and now only 3 points out with 3 games in hand. And for Philadelphia, their next game is against the Kings, so that should be 9 in a row. This team just wins in bunches, apparently. They've been doing that for the last couple years. But anyway, so the Rangers, right where we expected them. They're obviously sellers at this deadline, and you've got to expect that teams are calling about Matt Zuccarello. And now, granted, he's a UFA at the end of the season. It's funny that we're not talking about him more as one of those. At least, I mean, he's not elite. He's not that high end like Panarin or Stone or Duchesne, but he's definitely that next level. You know, we've talked about a lot of different players over the weeks leading up to this point. I would put him in the same ilk as a Derek Brassard or a Wayne Simmons. I think that they're right there. Gustav Nyquist. I think that he may be better than all of those players. He's a little bit older. He's 31, but to bring him in for a playoff run, he's been to a Stanley Cup final with the Rangers, and so what do you think they're looking for Zuccarello, as well as I think Kevin Hayes is a possibility to be moved as well. I think though the Rangers would probably prefer to sign him long term, but
yeah, I think for a guy like Zuccarello, and maybe even you could probably say the same for Kevin Hayes on this team. I think they're looking for maybe a second and third round, or maybe even throwing a prospect in there, because both these guys, like you said, they're that next level. They're that Gustav Nyquist type caliber player. And I mean, Zuccarello, he's been a perennial 50-point player for the last 4 seasons, so he's been constant, right? There's no up and down to his game, so you know what you're getting, and not to mention the speed that you're still getting with a guy at his age too. Which every team at this time of year still any time of year really covets speed. So I mean, this is a guy who can pretty much slot into your top line, slot into your second, maybe even your third line if you have that much depth on your forward position. And when you talk about a team that maybe might be looking to add just one more top 6 forward to the group, and I think of a team like Tampa Bay right now. They've got nearly $8 million in cap space to add at the deadline. And with, Zuccarello, I think he's still at like $4.5 million on his last year here. Because right now, the way Braden Point and Kucherov are playing together, for whatever reason, John Cooper has decided to slot Steven Stamkos on that second line to sort of split up Stamkos and Kucherov and, make that 1-2 punch a little bit more deadly. And I think, playing with Yanni Gordon-Palat's great, but I would love to see another speedy playmaker on his wing to feed Stamkos the puck, and I think Zuccarello would look really good playing alongside Stamkos and maybe Yanni Gord there.
The fact that it's even an option for the Lightning to bring somebody in is absurd.
It really is.
The one thing that I would point to, and we know we can always look back at a general manager's trade history, is let's look back at last year's trade deadline where the Rangers were able to, for Rick Nash, I mean, the Rangers got Ryan Spooner, a first-round pick, and a seventh-round pick, along with Bolesky. They took Bolesky to offset some of the salary.
Sure.
But they were able to get a roster player back and a first-round pick for Rick Nash. They were all in the McDonough and JT Miller trade where they acquired Nemestikov and Brett Howden. They also got a prospect, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. If Tampa wins the Cup this year, they will get another first-round pick in this upcoming draft in 2019.
Wow.
So So they, I mean, at very least they have a second round pick. So I mean, they traded, yes, two very high end players. I think higher end than Zuccarello or Hayes, but he was able to acquire a first round pick in both of those. And so I think you have to look and know he's going to at least get a second with a conditional, win the cup and it's a first, or re-sign him and it's a first. I think Jeff Gordon has proven that he will. He's going to make deals work for their organization for the future. They've been really nice about, really good about trading upwards for the future. So New York Rangers, I think, are one of the kind of the like underrated, interesting teams here at the deadline, because they really could change the face again. They kind of did that last year, but they could do it again. Let's go to the Devils, who have been kind of a disappointment after last year. Of course, Taylor Hall's been injured, and some different factors, really just not great goaltending. But Ben Lovejoy, Marcus Johansson, both up for grabs, I think, here at the deadline. Ben Lovejoy would be a nice, of course, he won the Stanley Cup with Pittsburgh, and so I think that he'd be a nice acquisition. He is injured right now, but as far as I know, he's not out long term. So I think it would, he would certainly help any team looking for a Stanley Cup. And Marcus Johansson, also a free agent, as well as Brian Boyle. So this team's got some of those depth guys that could make a difference in a series or in a particular game because of the way they play. Anything in particular that you think that the Devils are looking for?
Yeah, I think two names to watch out for more than any on this roster, and they might surprise you, but Keith Kincaid and Brian Boyle. And I say that because, you look at, maybe an offensive talented guy like Marcus Johansson, right? I think he cost a second and a third round to come over there from Washington. And I think they're going to probably try to recoup that, because I really don't see him re-signing there. Or at least I think it's a 50-50 toss-up at this point. There really doesn't seem to be much momentum of him re-signing. So I think he might be a little bit more difficult to move, because I think New Jersey might want a little bit more back and might want to recoup what they lose from that trade. But as far as Brian Boyle goes, you got a guy who can slot in at your third line center if you need him. Fourth line is even better for a guy that is pretty much one of the top face-off guys in the league. And he's a big body, still skates well. He's on pace to put up, I think, career-high numbers in terms of points right now. And so he's still a 30-point guy that can play on your third and fourth line if needed, kill penalties, and he's just an all-around hammer. And then looking at a guy like Keith Kincaid, right, you look at a team, to me, like Tampa Bay, for example, right? They've got Louis Domingue, but how much do you trust him, right? When Vasilevsky went down, you really saw a lot of goals going. I mean, luckily Tampa Bay is able to score a ton, so they were able to really lessen the damage and still keep winning. But I think Keith Kincaid, because the emergence of Blackwood and still on the hook for Corey Schneider for a few more years, I think Kincaid would be a nice chip to play in a goalie market where there's a lot of high-end starters that are looking to get moved, but yet teams looking for maybe a backup or just some insurance policies. He might be a little bit more of a tradable asset. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, let's go to one of the bigger names on my list that he's not a free agent for a long while. Still has 4 years left on his deal, but his name has been floated, so we too will float said name. Duncan Keith, the Chicago Blackhawks. We know that Brent Seabrook has already come out and said, nope, not waiving my no move clause. Don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I'm staying. Duncan Keith has not. And so is there a chance that Duncan Keith is dealt at the deadline? Just for some background info on his contract, he does have a 5.5, 38462 cap hit, but this year he is, whatever the rest of the year is on the salary, he gets 4.5 in the actual cash that he's getting. Next year's 3.5, the year after that 2.6, 2.1, and then 1.5 in his last year. So I think that in terms of a team who maybe on that bubble, but doesn't have all the cash to spend, may be interested in Duncan Keith if you're able to pry him away and convince him to come to your team. Is there any chance Duncan Keith leaves Chicago?
Boy, I really got to put this at maybe a 5% chance right now. With that, the cap hit is
so
one thing.
So you're saying there's a chance?
There's a very, very slim chance. And that's only because he hasn't come out and said, I'm not going to waive it and I'm staying put. That's the only reason I still give it a few percentage points of him going. And I think the biggest factor that would play into this is the term still left on it, right? He's still got 4 more years after this. And I think any team, maybe willing to fit him in right now is going to find difficulty, with the last few seasons of the contract. So,
but the nice thing though is, yes, it's a cap number, but they're only paying out $1.5 million, $2.1 million in cash, and so that's where I could see a team. Let's say Arizona comes calling and they go, look, they've had pretty friendly relationship between these two teams. If you think back, all the trades that they've made between them, Antoine Vermette went from Arizona to Chicago and then won a Stanley Cup in Chicago. You have Hjalmarsson, who went from Chicago to Arizona. You have the Dylan Strome trade that they made recently. I think that these two general managers, John Chaika and Stan Bowman, have a good relationship. And so, to be able to go, hey, there's some of your former teammates. I'm just going to pretend that Duncan Keith likes Hjalmarsson. So, there's some motivation to go down there. It's a young team. They're on the rise. I would say, Chicago is definitely on the downturn. Granted, they've won 4 in a row, but who cares? They're 4 games under 500, although they're only 5 points out of the playoffs, which is hilarious. That the 8th place team for the wild card is only 5 points out of reaching that second spot there. That's crazy. Whereas in the East, that 8 team, which is Detroit, is 10 points out. So, and they've played 2 more games than Columbus too. So really, they're probably more like 12. But to me, Chicago's on the way down, and Duncan Keith could go live in a really nice, warm spot, won't have to deal with the polar vortex, and could be a part of a team that seems to be building towards something. And that team wouldn't mind his cap hit, and they would appreciate the fact that he's making less money.
Yeah, I could agree with that. And like you talked about the relationship there before, they've made some deals. The only other team I think too that I could see a real possibility of him being a decent fit in terms of the veteran leadership and presence that would be great on that blue line would be the New Jersey Devils. Their captain, Andy Green, has got 1 more year left, and he's gone. And I don't see him re-signing. He's just, at this point in his career, I think he's gotten even slower than Duncan Keith has. Maybe even slower than Brett Seabrook. And then
get it burned because of the Devils. That was so bad.
New Jersey Devils, a possibility, but again, very, very slim. I just don't see him waiving his clause, much like Brett Seabrook. I think those two are lifetime Hawks, and Keith likely will get his number to the rafters, in my opinion, but that's another talk for another day.
Okay, let's quickly shift gears to the LA Kings, who are rapidly falling apart. They, of course, they're bottom of the West, almost bottom of the league if it weren't for Ottawa, who's gifted Colorado a first overall pick. And shoot, the way Colorado's looking, they might be up for 2 first overall picks, first and second. What if that happened? The LA Kings are not really in a great situation in terms of players becoming unrestricted free agents. They do have Carl Hagelin, who they acquired for. I'm now blanking on his name. Toffoli, yeah.
I'm sorry, not Toffoli, but
the other one.
Pearson.
Yes, there you go. And then Nate Thompson as well. So there's their 2 UFAs. And I'm wondering this. I'm looking across the league and I'm looking at the goaltending situation. LA is in. Jonathan Quick's 33 years old, and LA is not going to be good next year. I know they might like to be, but I don't think that they will be. Is there a chance that maybe they go, we could get something for Jonathan Quick right now, and there are some teams desperate for goaltending. Maybe we can ship him off, and maybe you can ship him off along with Jeff Carter and really do something to shake this team up. Are there any moves out there that this team can make to shake this lineup up, or do they even want to shake it up?
No, I do think they want to shake it up. And when you talk about a Jonathan Quick, right, the first team that pops up in my mind is the Florida Panthers. I think Mr. Luongo is fantastic when he's healthy, right? But the problem is staying healthy. And I think, while Jonathan Quick's been dealing with that lately too, I think if the LA Kings are willing to take back, say, a James Reimer, come back the other way, and then, like you say, maybe you throw in a couple picks or a prospect to come back to LA, I think Jonathan Quick would look really, really good as a starting goaltender for the Florida Panthers here as they try to assert themselves as, a playoff team here in the East. And, he's still 33, so he's not up at that age yet where you really start to see a huge decline. I still think he has the ability to be a number one, but playing in a situation where you do have Roberto Luongo who can, potentially relieve you, a good 20, 30 games out of the year, I think that would be great for Jonathan Quick. And on top of that, too, I think another piece, Jeff Carter, like you talked about, is a great ship to move right now. I think there's still a lot of teams that value his goal-scoring ability and his ability to play that second-line center position so well in terms of the two-way game. And at $5.2 million, a cap hit that, granted still runs for another 3 years after the season, I still think is still tradable.
Yeah, certainly still tradable. I would say the Florida Panthers, they've without tampering, I think that they've done their best to let it be known that they want Bobrovsky and Panarin.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that Bobrovsky is first on their list, which, if you have to choose between Quick and Bobrovsky, you're taking Bobrovsky at this point, especially just because of I think there's a 4-year age difference. But the Florida Panthers I agree, though, they have certainly set themselves up to acquire some players. And so I think that they have to be on the radar for any player, especially players who have played in warmer climates to begin with. Let's be honest, it'd be hard to go from playing in Anaheim to going and playing in Edmonton. That's a difficult shift. I'm trying to think of if any players did that. I know that, Gretzky went from playing in Edmonton to LA, and then notice it's not like he tried to go back. So it's difficult to, I imagine, to go live in places that are nice and warm and then go somewhere colder. So I think that Florida is going to be an interesting destination. I think that it's almost been thought of as, why doesn't Florida get these free agents like Tampa does, or the interest like Tampa does? And I don't know, the Florida Panthers organization, I think as a whole, there's something wrong with it. I think that players, there's interest in players, and then when push comes to shove, they almost always go sign somewhere else. And really the only guy who's been a huge proponent for the Panthers is Roberto Luongo. But you haven't seen, this huge influx of 32-plus-year-old players go, I'm going to go and, enjoy the weather in Florida and play hockey down there and love it. No, guys don't really do that, at least not any more than any other team, So I think that it'll be interesting, though, to see, can they bring in some huge names and really shake up that locker room? Because let's face it, Barkov, Huberdeau, Dadonov, Trocheck, Keith Yandel, it's not good enough. They're not good enough. It doesn't matter how good you think they look on the ice. It's not good enough because they're not beating anybody.
Right. No. And don't get me wrong, adding Hoffman was a great addition, but like you said,
hasn't done anything. It truly hasn't done a thing.
Right, and I do think there needs to be a little bit of shake up there. And when you talk about free agents not really considering Florida destination, right, I always think of two things. One, if you're a free agent and you go to a state with no state income tax, that's just more money in your pocket, right? So you think more free agents would totally be open for that, but they don't. So you're right. There definitely has to be something going on with management in there that the players know that we obviously don't. And I think, a lot of these agents might be whispering, hey, stay away from Florida because, their management isn't so keen. But
they've been there they've been to the playoffs once right. In the last 15 years or something like that. So.
Yeah, and they're always at the bottom of the league in terms of attendance as well too, and I think Tampa, without their recent success over the last 5-6 years, they might not be filling the stands either. So I think Florida. I remember
you need success. You need success to make it, but also,
absolutely.
but the vibe in Miami area, like they're like whatever greater Miami area, is way different than Tampa Bay.
Oh, for sure.
Tampa, that Gulf side is a totally different vibe and culture. So that's where I think that comes from. I know that we got to get running, but I want to throw one more name out there, because if he becomes a tradable asset, if this team decides that they aren't going to make the playoffs, or it's not worth hanging on to him, or they won't re-sign him, Jeff Skinner of the Buffalo Sabres could bring in a handsome ransom. And so I'm wondering what you think the Sabres could get for Jeff Skinner, who right now has, 30 goals? Close to it? Something like that?
Yeah.
No, yeah. So what do you think they'd get back for Jeff Skinner?
Boy, oh boy, that would be a king's ransom, wouldn't it? I think, obviously, I look at Thomas Tatar last year getting a first, second, and third round pick from Vegas, and I think when you look at a guy like Jeff Skinner, you at least have to get that, right? I mean, he's a 30-goal scorer right now, and he's on pace to, definitely going to break 40.
Goals,
I would hope so. So you have to assume at least a first, second, and then probably either, a roster player or, a prospect who could turn into a top 6 type of player, I think, if you're Buffalo. But again, I think Buffalo's still hoping they can get him signed into that $9 million range. But for me, I think if he does become tradable, it's got to be a minimum first, second, a roster player, maybe a prospect as well.
I just feel like it's a mistake to pay Jeff Skinner $9 million, but we're living in a different world where Jeff Skinner could get $9 million. He does have a no movement clause, so there is that. So he might be staying in Buffalo regardless. But I think we'll find out more, especially in I'd say 2 weeks from now. Things may have changed. I know that they're saying that Mark Stone, he's going to kind of get his last offer maybe this week, and same with Matt Duchene, and that'll really set the table for the next couple weeks. So looking forward to just that news coming out and everything progressing, so that we can see what the landscape looks like here. As much as I love the trade stuff, I'm looking forward to things being settled, so that then we can look ahead to the playoffs. That's where it really, really starts to get fun. But until then, of course, nobody has any problem with dreaming about their team bringing in Artemi Panarin. So it's all fun. Any last thoughts before we head off into the night?
Yeah, I'm hoping somebody here in the West can grab onto that playoff spots, and just really separate themselves from the bottom of the pack, because it seems like lately nobody really wants to do it. And maybe St. Louis, on this little run they got going, maybe they can start to separate themselves from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. If Colorado doesn't make the playoffs, it's a shame. That's a shame.
Yeah.
With how good that top line is, it's crazy to me that they can't bring in anybody else. They have to be in on Mark Stone or Duchesne. Well, not Duchesne. You think Duchesne would come back? I don't think so.
Oh no.
So, all right. Well, that's our show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That is, you can hit us up at OT Hockey Talk on Twitter, and you can let us know what you thought of our analysis of these wonderful trade deadline potentials. Our next show, we will be going through the what did we say we were doing? Oh, the biggest busts. The biggest busts of the year so far. So tweet at us. Maybe, you don't have to tell us, that who's having a horrible season. That what Ryan Kessler's having a bust of a season. We know that. Let's get a little deeper than the real obvious ones. But if you've got one where you're like, nobody's going to think of this guy, but he's having a really bad season, show us why. We'll talk about it on the next episode of Overtime Hockey Talk. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later in the week.